Today, I'm going to be discussing the connection between the endocannabinoid system and COVID-19. My goal is always to figure out the most safe and effective treatments possible. While there are plenty treatments today for COVID-19 that are very effective, they might not be the best, and we may still have other treatments to discover that can provide a much more safe environment for your body as you go through your healing process. So I believe that the endocannabinoid system, with the use of endocannabinoid regulators and modulators, like certain compounds found in the cannabis plant, can prevent and treat COVID-19. Now, I'm not going to make any claims of my own, and this discussion will be backed 100% by research that I'll have behind me like this as we go through this entire thing, so you can form your own conclusions. Now, let's go through a brief overview of what the endocannabinoid system even is. In 1988, which is the year I was born, researchers determined that a rat's brain has receptor sites that are activated by THC. This cannabinoid receptor, called CB1 or cannabinoid receptor 1, turned out to be far more abundant in the mammalian brain than any other G-coupled protein receptor. Here's the crazy thing about GPCRs. A lot of US approved pharmaceuticals target GPCRs, which comprise a superfamily of over 800 different human receptors that share the same basic protein structure. So understanding the endocannabinoid system is extremely important for COVID-19 and just for health in general. The endocannabinoid system is arguably the most important physiologic system involved in human health. It affects everything from mood, memory, sleep, appetite, pain, reproduction, and inflammation. And the inflammatory angle is what we are going to be mostly focusing on today with the endocannabinoid system. Right over here, you have a timeline of the endocannabinoid system since the first discovery in 1988 with cannabinoid receptor 1. And then by 1992, you have the first discovery of endocannabinoids. So the endocannabinoid system makes it so that you have cannabinoid receptors throughout your entire body. They're in your organs, your muscles, your nerves, cells, bones, skins, blood vessels. They're everywhere. Your cannabinoid receptors are activated by endocannabinoids, and these endocannabinoids are naturally occurring cannabinoids found inside your body. So we have two different types of cannabinoids. We have phytocannabinoids, which are plant-based cannabinoids like THC and CBD, and to this date, there have been over 180 phytocannabinoids that have been discovered. And then the endocannabinoids are the cannabinoids that are naturally occurring inside of our body. CBD, which is an endocannabinoid regulator and mimetic, is how it confers a lot of CBD's properties. And the endocannabinoid system can be modulated by phytocannabinoids, by other compounds that are found in the cannabis plant, other compounds in general, or even breathing. We'll discuss that part more in the end. This is a crazy survey that was done years back, and what they found was that only 13% of medical schools surveyed in the US mentioned the endocannabinoid system in any course. None of the 157 schools surveyed had a department, director, or full course on endocannabinoid system sciences. That's wild. We're typically taught in school that the major systems in the human body consist of things like the circulatory system and the respiratory system and the urinary system, the nervous system, the endocrine system, the lymphatic system, and a handful of other systems. When you bring these together, those systems make up the human body. But the endocannabinoid system, which is arguably the most important physiological system that connects all other systems, has not yet been included in mainstream medical curriculum. To me, the discovery of the endocannabinoid system is one of the most important medical discoveries of our time. Your endocannabinoid system is the master control system for virtually all of your physiology. If we brought light to the endocannabinoid system and added it into medical school curriculum, it really has the power to replace the current medical status quo of simply managing diseases. Instead of simply managing symptoms after a disease has occurred, we can prevent or even cure the disease by manipulating the endocannabinoid system. This is really important when we're discussing COVID. And, there are a handful of reasons why, entire regulatory system of the human body with receptors across your body from head to toe isn't taught in schools across the world yet, but you can probably guess a few reasons why. The endocannabinoid system has 3 key components, and those 3 key components are your cannabinoid receptors, the endocannabinoids, and then the metabolic enzymes. Your cannabinoid receptors, they're found on the surface of the cells like cannabinoid receptor 1 and cannabinoid receptor 2, CB1, CB2. Then you have the endocannabinoids, which, as I mentioned, are the cannabinoids that are naturally produced from within your body that activate the cannabinoid receptors. So a few examples of that we have are anandamide, 2AG, we have 2AGE, NADA, OAE. There are a bunch of different endocannabinoids. That's a small list. The ones that we will focus on more today are anandamide and 2AG. Anandamide can be viewed as the bliss molecule or nature's antidepressant. When we get the runner's high, up until very recently, and most people still think this, that you're releasing endorphins when you get that runner's high. In reality, you're releasing the endocannabinoid anandamide, which provides that blissful feeling. So then, to break down those endocannabinoids after they're used, we have metabolic enzymes like FAAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase. So what we see here in this timeline, in 1997, we see that FAAH and MAGL, which is another metabolic enzyme that breaks down endocannabinoids, was discovered. So within less than 10 years, they essentially went from not even knowing these things exist to understanding a whole bunch of the endocannabinoid system. And if you see, this chart goes all the way to 2013. The discoveries are still being found. This is why we need more normalization of these topics so that there is more research being done around it. In the short time that I've been alive, we've seen this many amazing benefits from studying the endocannabinoid system. So the thing is, with your endocannabinoid system, when an imbalance is detected in our internal environment, the body naturally synthesizes endocannabinoids that interact with our cannabinoid receptors. So you don't just need, phytocannabinoids to activate these endocannabinoids. They literally naturally happen by themselves because it's your master regulatory system of your entire body. So it's going to have to, synthesize things sometimes. So what it does is it stimulates a chemical response that works to return your physiological processes back to homeostasis. And the researchers that study the endocannabinoid system have said that it's the most complicated and ubiquitous signaling system in our bodies. So it's wild that nobody even knew this existed until the late 1980s. Everything from neurodegenerative disorders to rheumatoid arthritis and cancer have shown changes in endocannabinoid levels and greater receptor expression. What this suggests is that the endocannabinoid system is an effective target for restoring homeostasis in the body and promoting health. So we see this. The research is clear. Scientists have found certain conditions that are associated with hypersensitivity to pain or stimulus. such as migraines, fibromyalgia, and irritable bowel syndrome. And they're finding that this may be linked to a dysfunctional endocannabinoid system. This hypothesis that the endocannabinoid system may lie at the root of some disorders is known as clinical endocannabinoid deficiency disorder. And it's believed that by supplementing the body with naturally occurring cannabinoids from plants like CBD, we can correct this deficiency, relieve symptoms, and restore your health. And, I would argue that many people today suffer from endocannabinoid deficiencies. And what I'm wondering here is, could the dysregulation of endocannabinoids, the endocannabinoid system, be linked to heightened risk for COVID-19 complications? My theory is suggesting that yes, it does. And, the research that we have on this topic, it shows that even like right here, for example, small doses of phytocannabinoids can help support the endocannabinoid system and enhance its signaling, which promotes a healthy body. This study here is on low dose THC. As I mentioned earlier, there are over 180 different phytocannabinoids that have so far been discovered. THC and CBD are 2. And that really shows how much we still have to go and how elementary things still are with these sciences. There's plenty of research, but 32 years worth, we need more. So now that you know all about the endocannabinoid system, let's link COVID-19 into this. What is COVID-19? How does it work? What are the biomechanics of it? So COVID-19 first stands for, COVID, CO, corona, VI, virus, D, disease, 19, the year. And the way that COVID-19 works and this coronavirus disease is that the ACE2 receptor is the host cell receptor responsible for mediating infection by COVID-19. What that means is that COVID enters the human cells through your ACE2 receptors. ACE2 receptors are found all across your body too. They're found in your kidneys, your lungs, your blood vessels, GI tract. They're in other places too. So over here, you can see we have a really awesome study that is studying the endocannabinoid system and the renin-angiotensin system. And what this study said is that they're not aware of any studies that link the endocannabinoid system to the ACE2 receptor. But what they found are some connections between the endocannabinoid system and the renin-angiotensin system. And ACE2, which stands for angiotensin converting enzyme 2, belongs to the renin-angiotensin system, or RAS. So what this has is it does include links to the ACE receptor. And what this study says is that crosstalk between the ECS and the RAS has been described in several studies using upregulated RAS rat models, showing that cannabinoid receptor 1 and angiotensin 2 type 1 receptor form receptor heteromers with functional interactions, and suggesting that hypertensive states are related to lower expression of cannabinoid 1 and higher levels of angiotensin 2. Okay. So what we know with COVID, as I mentioned in the very beginning about how the endocannabinoid system is responsible for controlling inflammation as well, what we've seen is the presence of inflammation has been shown to increase the number of ACE2 receptors, and it makes them more susceptible to infection from COVID-19. When this happens, certain pathways can be overactive and the immune system can start causing damage when fighting the virus. This will lead to excessive inflammation, swelling, pain, organ damage, and even death. But speaking of the immune system is regulated by endocannabinoids, which include the modulation of immune responses in different cell types. And it has an effect on cytokine networks and the induction of apoptosis in immune cells. One of the reasons an approach with a focus on the endocannabinoid system can be beneficial is that ACE2 receptor gene expression and susceptibility to infection with COVID-19 is increased in people with high levels of inflammation. This may be one of the reasons that people with issues like cardiovascular disease, asthma, diabetes, and obesity, which are all conditions that have been linked to inflammation, experience higher mortality rates from COVID-19. And as we see here in this study says that serum cytokine levels are elevated in patients with COVID-19 associated cytokine storm, including, now take a note of these because this is where we're going to start connecting it into the endocannabinoid system and phytocannabinoids. They include interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6, IP10, TNF, interferon gamma, MIP 1 alpha and 1 beta, and VEGF. What this study says is that higher interleukin 6 levels are strongly associated with shorter survival. Okay, now that we've talked about the connections of the ECS and the RAS, and we've seen that the endocannabinoid system modulates inflammation, what we know about COVID-19 is that the presence of inflammation has been shown to increase the number of ACE2 receptors and make them more susceptible to infection from COVID. And then, speaking of inflammation, we have the pro-inflammatory cytokine storms, which have been shown to be a major factor in COVID complications and death. What are cytokines? Cytokines aren't always bad. In the case of COVID, we're talking about the pro-inflammatory cytokines. And cytokines are biological chemicals that stimulate cell pathways and allow for communication between your cells. Cytokines are essential for telling the immune system to start doing its job. Again, this is normal unless cytokines accelerate. When this happens, certain pathways can be overactive and the immune system can start causing damage when fighting the virus, leading to excessive inflammation, swelling, pain, organ damage, and even death. And one of the reasons I believe an approach with a focus on the endocannabinoid system can be beneficial is that ACE2 receptor gene expression and susceptibility to infection with COVID-19 is increased in people with high levels of inflammation. Okay, well, this might be one of the reasons why people with issues like cardiovascular disease, asthma, diabetes, and obesity, which are all conditions that have been linked to inflammation, experience higher mortality rates from COVID-19. And I want you to remember the cytokines that I mentioned here. And when we connect that in to the endocannabinoid system, I want you to see those connections, okay? So what this study says here is serum cytokine levels that are elevated in patients with COVID-19 associated cytokine storm include interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6, IP10, TNF, interferon gamma or INF gamma, MIP 1 alpha, 1 beta, and VEGF. Higher interleukin 6 levels are strongly associated with shorter survival. Okay. Now, we have another piece of research here, which is COVID-19, consider cytokine storm syndromes and immunosuppression. Now, we've already linked the endocannabinoid system and the immune system. What this study says is that in hyperinflammation, immunosuppression is likely to be beneficial. Reanalysis of data from a phase 3 randomized control trial of interleukin 1 blockade in sepsis showed significant survival benefit in patients with hyperinflammation without increased adverse events. A multicenter randomized control trial of an interleukin 6 receptor blockade, which is licensed for cytokine release syndrome, has been approved in patients with COVID-19 pneumonia and elevated interleukin 6 in China. Janus kinase or JAK inhibition could affect both inflammation and cellular viral entry in COVID-19. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. So those are the cytokines, the main cytokines that they're focusing on. All right. Now we're going to connect some research about the immune responses regulated by CBD. What this study over here said is that the data overwhelmingly support the notion that CBD is immune suppressive and that the mechanisms involve direct suppression of activation of various immune cell types, induction of apoptosis, and promotion of regulatory cells, which in turn control other immune cell targets. Cool. This research goes on to say that critical targets of suppression include cytokines such as TNF-alpha, IFN gamma, interleukin-6, interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-2, interleukin-17A, and chemokines such as CCL2. The overall mechanism of CBD involves direct suppression of target cells, such as effector T cells and microglial cells, through suppression of kinase cascades, and various transcription factors. All right. So you see, we're connecting. We're starting to connect now. Then what we have is this beautiful study right here. And this is analysis of stem cells that's treated with moringa and CBD. So what it says here is that both the treatments are efficient in the interleukin-6 signaling. In particular, CBD reduces the effect of pro-inflammatory Janus kinase and STAT pathways. All right, we're starting to connect the dots here. As I've shown, the endocannabinoid system is the master regulatory system of the human body. The endocannabinoid system modulates the activity of endocannabinoids, and CBD and other phytocannabinoids, many that we're not going to discuss today, work as endocannabinoid mimetics and regulators. So we can look at this study right here, which is on this exact topic. Cannabis for COVID-19. Can cannabinoids quell the cytokine storm? All right. So what this study says is that the essential role that the endocannabinoid system plays in immunity and the modulation of inflammation or inflammatory cytokine storm following activation of cannabinoid receptors by endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids suggests endocannabinoid system components are targets for the COVID-19 and AIDS syndemics, as well as in other immune-related disorders. So that's cool that they even focused on AIDS with this one. And what we're seeing is that researchers are now clearly studying whether CBD may actually help reduce the cytokine storms and excessive lung inflammation that's killing a lot of people with COVID-19. We know that the endocannabinoid system can modulate cytokine storms, but we're now finding out the direct interactions with COVID-19. So Jack Yu, the author of a study that's happening right now on cytokine storms and CBD and COVID-19, just said this in an interview. Our laboratory studies indicate pure CBD, and that's right over here, can help the lungs recover from the overwhelming inflammation or cytokine storm caused by the COVID-19 virus, and restore healthier oxygen levels in the body. The article that this interview was from also made the mention that their model, which takes advantage of the large, unique genetic structure of the novel coronavirus, produced classic symptoms of ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome, like the overwhelming destructive immune response. Then CBD significantly downregulated classic indicators of the excess, like inflammation promoting cytokines, as it improved oxygen levels in the blood and enabled the lungs to recover from the structural damage. So this article goes on to say that they looked at objective measures of lung function in mice, like levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, oxygen levels in the blood before and after treatment, as well as temperature, which is an indicator of inflammation. What they found is that oxygen levels went up while temperatures and cytokine levels went down with CBD therapy. Days later, a more detailed analysis of the lungs reinforced reduction of key indicators of destructive inflammation, which their model, like the virus, drove way up, including reduced levels of interleukin-6 and infiltrating neutrophils. In fact, both clinical symptoms and physical lung changes resulting from ARDS were reversed with treatment of CBD. That's crazy. So what the author of this, one of the authors of this study, again, Jack Yu, he was quoted saying, at least one way CBD is thought to calm the immune response is because it looks similar to endocannabinoids. Now remember, in the very beginning I said we can look at compounds like CBD as endocannabinoid regulators and mimetics. So he's saying because it looks similar to endocannabinoids. A natural cell signaling system in our bodies believed to be involved in a wide variety of functions from sleep to reproduction to inflammation and immune response. We've talked about that already. CB1 and CB2, the main receptors for this system, are found extensively throughout the body, including the brain and respiratory system, where we breathe in man-made and natural irritants in the air, as well as virus and bacteria that might inflame. While understanding the workings of the natural endocannabinoid system is still very much a work in progress, it's thought that one way CBD works to reduce seizures, for example, is indirectly through the large number of CB1 receptors in the brain. And we already showed some research about your cannabinoid receptors in your brain, so you can go back on that and check it out. What they showed is that, and here is the actual study that they're going with right now, the symptoms were either totally or partially reversed and returned to normal after treatment with high potency CBD. Wild. In the beginning, I showed you the links, why the endocannabinoid system is important. Now, over this last year, we've been seeing more and more research on this exact specific topic of phytocannabinoids, the endocannabinoid system, and COVID-19. So up until now in this discussion, we were not making any of the direct claims with the research. Now I'm going to show you where the most modern research is with phytocannabinoids, the endocannabinoid system, and endocannabinoid system modulation, and COVID-19. Now remember, phytocannabinoids are not the only way to modulate and regulate your endocannabinoid system. There are other ways, other natural ways. Again, we'll get to that. All right, next, we have results from an ongoing Israeli study showing that a combination of terpenes and CBD may lead to really promising results. This is still not even released yet, so it's ongoing, as I mentioned. This is a link on their website that has the abstract from the current study that they're doing, so you can go read what they have so far. And you know, like here's about their cytokine secretion and things like that, as we've already been mentioning and talking about. So what the report showed is that a combination of CBD with terpenes was 2 times more effective at inhibiting cytokine activity than dexamethasone, which is a corticosteroid, which in a recent study found to be effective in treating COVID-19 cytokine storms. So, you know, I'm like, yeah, we're getting somewhere, you know? So what they also found is that CBD alone inhibited around 75% of the cytokines on average, while the terpene alone inhibited around 80%. And this is really interesting because we have research that shows terpenes from cannabis don't mediate an entourage effect by acting at cannabinoid receptors. That's that study here. And what a lot of us have known is that terpenes have their own health benefits themselves. So anybody who says that you need terpenes and cannabinoids mixed together for an entourage effect, the science does not support that. It's not helping the phytocannabinoid as much as it's helping something else in your body at the same time. So yes, if you add the terpene and CBD together, you are going to have better benefits hypothetically, but does that mean that it's acting on your cannabinoid receptors? No. Now, here's a really interesting one because this has to do with synthetic cannabinoids. This FDA approval for a phase 2 clinical trial, what they did is they got an approval, FSD Pharma. They submitted an investigational new drug application for a clinical trial using a synthetic cannabinoid drug called micro-PEA to treat COVID-19. So that's the cool thing, is that, there's so many different angles that this can be done in. For me, when I talk about an endocannabinoid mimetic and regulator, I mean, that could come from a synthetic compound as well. That could come from synthetic cannabinoids. What is the safest and most effective way? I would say that the most natural method is going to be the most safe and effective. So a lot of these studies on CBD or phytocannabinoids, the cytokine storms, COVID-19, like they still need to be peer reviewed, but if they're accurate, we can start moving these things into human trials and see what the combination of CBD, other phytocannabinoids, terpenes all mixed together and see how they work in actual, double-blind human trials with COVID-19 related cytokine storm syndrome. So, we're moving towards something beneficial. Now, here's another really interesting one. So 4,600 different plant compounds were screened for SARS-CoV-2 main protease inhibition. What they found at the very top was cannabis A, which is a compound found strictly in the cannabis plant. And that's wild. They went through 4,600 different plant compounds, and then a compound that's only found in cannabis was at the top of the bag. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right. So this one right here, this is another study on this topic. So as you see, this is still in preprints. Like I said, a lot of these are not peer reviewed yet. If you're in a global problem like we've been dealing with COVID-19, preprint is great because what it does is it allows people to go look at your research and help you better your research before your peer review process. Peer reviewing could take 6 months. So, by putting things into preprint, I mean, I'm not going to shame somebody for putting something out before it's peer reviewed. I think it's actually beneficial for all of us as a whole. We can all be bettering ourselves through preprints like this. So what this study says is that working under the Health Canada research license, we developed over 800 new cannabis sativa lines and extracts and hypothesized that high CBD cannabis sativa extracts may be used to modulate ACE2 expression in COVID-19 target tissues. Screening cannabis sativa extracts using artificial human 3D models of oral, airway, and intestinal tissues, we identified 13 high CBD cannabis sativa extracts that modulate ACE2 gene expression and ACE2 protein levels. Our initial data suggests that some cannabis sativa extracts downregulate serine protease TMPRSS2, another critical protein required for SARS-CoV-2 entry into host cells. Now, it's also important to note because when studies like this come out, what we start seeing are news headlines that say, new study shows CBD can cure coronavirus. What these researchers said in an interview was that there were other high CBD extracts that they used that didn't modulate ACE2 gene expression. So this is why we need to have so much more research on these topics, because they literally developed 800 different cannabis strains to be able to figure out what different profile of, plant compounds, terpenes, cannabinoids does the best. And that's the wild part, is that when you're finding like too high CBD strains, one's modulating ACE2, one's not, you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? And what's going on is that there isn't enough research on this topic. There isn't enough funding for these topics. So with all this talk of CBD and other phytocannabinoids, you might be thinking that these should be a primary treatment option. I mean, what CBD shows us is that the endocannabinoid system can be voluntarily modulated to confer health benefits. The endocannabinoid system can also be modulated by other drugs, synthetic ones like we just showed, and like I mentioned in the very beginning, even breath work. So we have a study here with one of my favorite people on the planet. His name is Wim Hof, and what Wim Hof has done is he's shown the world that you can control voluntarily your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system through doing this breath work. And through this, he's been able to do insane feats that were thought to be impossible, like, surviving in freezing cold or burning hot temperatures without any water or anything, just using his breath. This guy climbed Mount Everest in his shorts, no oxygen tank, nothing, just using the breath work. So what this study did is that, and then, we have another study right here as well, brain over body. And that's a study on the willful regulation of autonomic function during cold exposure. And if you know me, you know I love my cold therapy. So what they did, these researchers were studying various parts of the brain during the Wim Hof method. And they compared the response of Wim Hof's brain to those of other healthy adults. They were blown away because what they found was that Wim Hof's brain had significant brain activation in the upper brainstem region as compared to the regions of the brain that are involved in thermoregulation. Now, this is where it gets fun, because the upper brainstem is associated with pain control through the release of opioids and, can you guess it? Endocannabinoids. All right. So what the researchers concluded was that the Wim Hof method triggered the endocannabinoid system to release endocannabinoids, which produce relaxation, reduced anxiety, and a myriad of other health benefits. And this right there is one of the mechanisms that allows Wim Hof and whoever practices his method, like myself, to survive in extreme cold and to not be taken over by any disease, really. So as we see in the research is that aversive stimuli to the skin triggers the pain regulating mechanism of the endocannabinoid system. The results also suggest that the Wim Hof method triggers the endocannabinoid system to reduce immune response. Okay, let's go back to this clinical trial right here. And what we're going to see is the Wim Hof method has the power to fight these pro-inflammatory cytokines, like the ones I mentioned above. So we're gonna go through this one together. Okay, here we go. All right, you see that? Including but not limited to interleukin 6, interleukin 10, and interleukin 1RA. All right. Haven't we mentioned some of those already? We sure have. And what this says here in the study is autoimmune disease are characterized by an inappropriate inflammatory response against tissues in the body. These diseases, of which rheumatoid arthritis is the most well known, represent a major healthcare burden. Pro-inflammatory cytokines such as TNF-alpha, interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta are central and pathogenesis of rheumatoid arthritis and many other autoimmune diseases. Biologics that antagonize inflammatory cytokines or their receptors, e.g., like, for example, anti-TNF alpha, soluble TNF alpha receptor, anti-interleukin 6 receptor, and interleukin 1 receptor antagonists are very effective treatments. However, they're very expensive and can have serious side effects. Well, what we found is not all the treatments are very expensive or can have serious side effects. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, for me, this is not just about COVID. This has to do with human health in general. What this went on to say is that furthermore, the consequences of rheumatoid arthritis are currently completely beyond the patient's sphere of influence. Therefore, innovative therapies aimed at limiting inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis patients are warranted. Now, this is the Wim Hof research. So the reason it's talking about rheumatoid arthritis is because, they were focusing on that, but, that's an inflammatory issue as well. It's important to note that if I had my COVID-19 protocol, it would include far more than just CBD. But this plant compound, which I've already said a million times, works as an endocannabinoid regulator and mimetic, is potentially a fantastic place to start. And beyond that, with more clinical research done on the endocannabinoid system, we can better learn how to modulate the endocannabinoid system to prevent and cure not just COVID-19, but all disease.